I've said if anybody disputes the account of that, I will submit to a polygraph because I know exactly how that conversation went down, and I'm telling the truth about it. I take no pleasure in that because we're projecting weakness on the world stage.
Let's kick things off by checking in with This Week on the Hill. As usual, we've got an exclusive interview with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. He was reflecting on this article in the Wall Street Journal that says behind closed doors, President Biden seems to have lost a step. Behind closed doors, that's what it seems. And Speaker Johnson talked about his personal experience here. Take a look.
Yeah, big news story that the Wall Street Journal reporters interviewed, I think, around 50 people, Republicans and Democrats, about the president's mental acumen and the idea that it's quite obvious to everyone that he's not on his A game. I'll say that charitably. And they quoted an exchange that he and I had in the Oval Office, just the two of us. There were several people who talked about that. I didn't give comment to the article, but it's when we were talking about his executive order on LNG exports, and he intimated to me that he didn't quite understand what he signed, that he didn't know that he paused exports, and that's had a terrible effect on the country, our security, our economy, and it's fueling Vladimir Putin's war machine because Europe has to get their gas from him instead of from us. And the president tried to argue with me and tell me that he didn't do that when clearly he did. That was the subject of the article, and I've said if anybody disputes the account of that, I will submit to a polygraph because I know exactly how that conversation went down, and I'm telling the truth about it. I take no pleasure in that because we're projecting weakness on the world stage.
So, Akash, let's turn to, because oftentimes the discussion of the president's abilities, his age, however you want to describe it, is always shot through the lens of this election and the campaign, and that's appropriate. But there's business that needs to be done here, and Speaker of the House Johnson, I think he's a very serious man, and he's being as polite as possible in talking about this anecdote and pointing out that there's important business that needs to get done. Our economy, the world's economy, is relying on us, and we don't have a full functioning White House, it appears. Are you concerned about this when you hear this story?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's particularly concerning to hear it, as you mentioned, from Speaker Johnson, who is, by all means, a sober and pretty responsible person. He doesn't throw around baseless political accusations just to score points. And so for him to recount this experience he had with President Biden, he even declined to talk to the Wall Street Journal about it because he didn't want to make himself the news story because he obviously is operating with a level of humility. But I think he's being charitable about it, right? We've seen how President Biden is in public. And I think what's important here is the context that the speaker is alluding to. It's not just that the president has very clearly lost a step. It's the policy outcomes that go alongside it, right? So he has a horrendous policy platform, a horrendous policy track record on domestic policy, on foreign policy, and now we're seeing that he's clearly incapable of handling these crises on a personal level. So I think there's a number of concerning aspects of this story, least of which is simply the president's ability to hold a conversation.
Yeah, I'd love for Elaine to pick up that ball and run with it a bit, because this is there's two issues here: bad policies, but then the inability to actually effectively execute those policies.
Yeah, and I think we can all point to different instances where it was kind of a head scratcher on what the president may have said or how he may have reacted. Obviously, we've all had a little bit of fun with his whisperings and kind of the oddities there. But whether he remembers the policies that he's signing or understands them, the American people remember them because they are policy losers. Banning the LNG exports will only lead to an increase in emissions, not a decrease. And it was simply just to cater to his far left environmentalist side. It'll increase emissions. It'll increase the cost of energy. I mean, what everybody should remember is that when he took office, gas was 30-40% less than it is right now. And we were energy independent. And now we're energy dependent because of the war on domestic energy that this president started on day one when he came into office. And now we have to buy energy from countries that really don't like us. So it really is not just an economic issue, but it's a national security issue.
Well, and Elaine, if I could follow up with you on that quickly, because you raised the specifics of this, the LNG exports. I don't think it's unfair to ask the question, in given this anecdote, that when you hear that the president himself was unclear whether this was just a study that they were proposing or whether it was actually affected signed policy. is he unaware of what his White House and his administration is doing? Is it worth raising the specter that there's other people who are kind of getting things done and say, here, Mr. President, sign this? I know I don't want to be conspiratorial, but that's what this story suggests.
I don't want to be conspiratorial either, but there's been enough. There's been a lot of people who have raised those kinds of questions. And I think this is probably one of the pieces of evidence that may in fact support that theory and bring it out of the conspiratorial column and maybe into more realistic if he really didn't understand what he was signing, because it is the root, the energy issue and the energy cost is the root of this economy. And that has been what has driven all of this inflation.
Yeah, let's bring Robert Charles into this, because I think Elaine's really drilling down on something here, because it's not like he is unaware of the policy. He had a working understanding of what this LNG export policy was and the ramifications were. He just apparently, according to the speaker, didn't know that he had already signed it into effect, and the repercussions, were already in place here. Small businesses and our economy is feeling the brunt of it. Robert, this is disconcerting to say the least, especially coming from the Speaker of the House, who again is a pretty sober and serious guy.
So let me cut to the chase, Larry. 2 points, simple. Having worked for 2 presidents, they sign a foot-tall stack of papers every day. They often have no idea what's in the paper. They take the advice of their counsel, and so do cabinet members, by the way. So the fact that he doesn't know something is, even if he were on his game, doesn't really surprise me. The fact that he's not on his game is really the big issue. And again, to cut to the chase, foreign leaders all over the world pay very, very close attention to presidents. When Reagan left office, one of his biographers interviewed the Politburo of the Soviet Union. And what did they find? They found that they were terrified when Ronald Reagan said, "You will end up on the ash heap of history," because they saw what he had done to the PATCO air traffic controllers. And they realized this guy's word is his bond, and he means it. Right now, the foreign leadership around this world, in particular, Xi, and leadership in places like Venezuela and Iran, and of course Putin, are looking at this, and they're asking a very simple question. This is not a mystery. He's not only one step behind, he's not even in the same ball field, okay? He's out there in a completely different field. They're looking and they're saying right now, we have 6 months left. What can we do while we've got this guy on the ropes? And not in the game? What can we do? And that's what's happening in foreign countries all over the world. This is a national security issue, which makes it national security and foreign policy a major issue in November.
Yeah, that's an important angle on it, Robert. And Akash, if we could just finish this up, bringing back to domestic policy, though. The House is at work. There's still things getting done. There's a lot of things that the House could do to advance a more pro-free market, robust economy kind of agenda. And yet, from Speaker Johnson's description here, it seems like the pitfalls are more than just the regular partisan squabbling. Am I off base there?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the House has been and continues to hold President Biden accountable for his policies, but Robert is alluding to something very, very important here that Elaine touched on as well with domestic policy, which is that who is actually calling the shots? Of course, the president isn't going to know the in-depth details of every single thing going on in the White House or in his administration. It's his job to be above the fray a little bit, but ultimately, are the people who are making decisions, are the ones who are driving the ball, do they have any idea of the consequences of what they are doing? And by all indication, what we have is a White House being driven by a bunch of millennial and Gen Z TikTokers who simply do not understand the consequences of the far left agenda they are pushing. It's been clear that Biden has been beholden to the far left since day one of his presidency. That's been clear on domestic policy, on foreign policy, what have you. But it's particularly concerning when these consequences are not being felt by the people who are pushing it, because ultimately President Biden is the one who needs to be held accountable, because he's the one who will be on the ballot in November that the American people are going to have to respond to.
Well, thanks for chiming in on this roundtable. Your organizations are constantly engaging with lawmakers and trying to advance a pro-freedom and pro-free market agenda here in the country. This Wall Street Journal article, it's had a ripple effect, and everyone in D.C. is still talking about it. This is more than just a political issue. Absolutely. This is actually affecting how things get done in Washington right now.